Hello, I'm Luke, and before I ask you today's question, I'm actually going to share with you a little story that's happened today, which has kind of sparked this whole conversation. So every morning, or most mornings during the week, I get up and go to CrossFit, go to gym. I was at gym this morning, doing a workout, great space, great environment, feeling good, and chatting with this guy, new to the gym, only been there a couple of months. Chatting away to him, usual kind of questions in terms of who you are, where you've been, what's going on. And the question arose where I wanted to know, well, what do you do with your day? What do you do with yourself? How do you offer yourself in service? So I asked him, what do you do for work? And he said, I actually, and with a little bit of hesitation, it's obviously quite new to him, said, I'm actually studying at the moment. So I'm really lucky. I get to be here and I get to study, and my wife is working, but I get to be at home and study. And in that very moment, now keep in mind, I'm having a really nice conversation with a really nice person in an environment where I feel really comfortable. And in that very moment, I had this objective view of myself where I saw the thought pattern that happened when he told me this story, which was, I'm staying at home and my wife is working. And immediately in my head, I made this assumption, you must be quite weak as a man. Whoa, firstly, please don't hate me for saying that. But I think because I didn't know where it came from, I'm sure I could go back through it and I could find how I've somehow formed this ridiculous opinion. But for someone I truly believe that I'm pretty reasonable and pretty fair in my thinking and kind of look at the world with a fair bit of equality and so on. But I had this prejudice in my head which said, despite my beliefs in that men and women should absolutely be equal, where when he told me that, I made this assumption that he would be a weak man because a strong man wouldn't let his woman go. Whoa, where does that come from? And for people who know me really well, you'd know that I don't think like that normally. So why am I telling you this very, slightly embarrassing and vulnerable story? But why am I telling you this story? Because we all do it. And why does it matter? Because it leads to a question that I have for you, which is, knowing that this is a form of prejudice, we're going to go through this now, how do we eliminate prejudice? How do we do it? If I'm having that moment in a gym where I'm in a really safe space with good people, how do we remove it? But before we do that, let's have a quick overview of, what is prejudice? So for those out there who maybe think they know it, but they don't really, to give you a dictionary example of it, which I think is a good way to just clarify in your mind. Prejudice is an unfavorable opinion or feeling formed beforehand or without knowledge, thought, or reason. I think the best way it sums up here is unreasonable feelings, opinions, or attitudes, especially of a hostile nature regarding an ethnic, racial, social, or religious group. Now, the interesting part, when you look at prejudice, we talk about it for groups. We think of it as a major collective. Now, for me, I had this example, and I've got another example which I can share with you, where I had this moment of prejudice just within my own self with one other person. So another example for you is looking at, we're in a train station, we're in Turkey, we were going along, this woman came up and she had been following us and she flagged us down to speak to us. Now immediately our response was, no, we're fine, we don't want anything from you. Now this woman, as it goes, had heard or overheard our lack of ability to find our way through this train station, and she was actually just stopping us to give us a hand to say, yeah, you kind of need to be back that way. That was it. That was all she had to do. Now, we were stopping that connection. We were forcing her to kind of leave us alone because we had made an assumption that something else was up here, right? That is a prejudice. So why does this matter? Why do we want to eliminate it? Well, I guess it matters in terms of what your greater vision is for the world. I think you don't necessarily even need a faith or belief to have your own structural belief system where you would think, actually, a better version of tomorrow is to have a world without prejudice, because we see so much divide. You don't need to go far. You can just turn on your TV and on the news. You'll see plenty of examples of where prejudice, where these unreasonable thoughts or opinions against particular groups, especially of a hostile nature, have created such divide in our world. And it breaks my heart. It breaks all of our hearts. But we look at it like it's this big external thing. It's not. It's within us. Today for me was just like a massive aha moment of thinking, wow, we really have it. In terms of what does it kind of mean? How do we go about doing this? Well, we kind of need to figure out, I guess, like what is it? How do we identify this prejudice within ourselves? And what is it? Is it innately within us? Well, if you look at different types of scientific information, I've been doing some research there. It's attached to, I guess, a built-in fear factor. It's that fight or flight mode that we have in our brain, and they've actually found and done different types of research which suggests that it kind of sits in the same place where empathy is, the seat of empathy in your brain, in terms of where your neural networks are. And they're saying that there's different responses based on how much prejudice is attached with that particular moment, which is really fascinating. And goes on to kind of suggest that we're not born this way, and rather we build this within our brains, during adolescence. And there's a need to transcend divisive impulses which no longer serve our survival. So that's ultimately what this particular one I saw, their outcome is that we have a capacity to overcome this. So if science is saying and suggesting, I should say, that we can see it, there's pathways in our brain that relate to it in this physical realm, but we actually have the capacity to override it. I mean, that's good news. But let's think about it just on a day-to-day basis. And I want everyone to kind of put yourself in your shoes for a minute in an everyday situation. And to give you an example, you're walking along the street and someone who is maybe quite clearly affected by homelessness walks up to you and they stop you in your tracks. So you're walking maybe to work, stopped in your tracks and said, "Hi, can you give me $1?" Now, in this moment, sorry to point, but in this moment, think about what is running through your mind? What are your assumptions that you're making about this individual? Do they want the money because of drugs, because of alcohol, because they're probably going to try and mug you? Like, are these the thoughts that run in your head? And I'm going to say there have to be at least 50% of you, if not more, who kind of go, well, yeah, naturally. And again, it's this survival mode. It's this fight or flight. What's happening here? But that is a prejudice. Like, on an everyday level, that's a prejudice beyond judging people for what they believe in, for their color of their skin, for who they choose to love. I mean, come on, like, this is crazy. But even beyond that, this is what we do on a daily basis. So to have the question, how do we eliminate it? For me, if we want to create a peaceful world, we need to create peace within. So if we want to eliminate prejudice outside, I actually believe, and I've formed my opinion, that we need to remove and eliminate prejudice from within. We need to find self-awareness in our everyday interactions with people. And how do we do that? We become aware of these structures in our mind where they're, I wrote down a little quote for myself, which is, it's like a subtle infection of our minds, which is perversing our capacity to move towards a more united and peaceful world. I believe that we've got these existing structures, and the only way that we can kind of break them is to be able to move beyond them. How do we do that? Well, in this very very example that I gave you at the start around this guy at the gym, I didn't say anything about that. In fact, I pushed that very far aside, and I leaned in more to understand and know this guy, because I thought, you know what, the only way we can do it is to reach out to that individual and to know them as they are without any of that prejudice around them. Before we make that judgment call, let's push that aside and learn to love that individual, because that's what we are, And for me, my belief is God is love. So the only way we can see that within each other is to lean in and to be able to see that light within. And maybe, just maybe, through doing that, we will then recreate these cognitive behaviors, these thought patterns, these neural patterns in our mind, to not make that assumption anymore. So when that particular thing comes up again, we'll go, oh, actually, you remind me of a friend of mine named John, because that's a good experience that I've now created for myself. Does that make sense? But to then look at it from a spiritual perspective, because I know this is quite a long video, but there's a lot of information, I'm going to share with you right before we leave a quote from Abdul Baha from his Paris talks, which I think sums it up beautifully, which is, "Do not be content with showing friendship in words alone. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path." Why does this matter so much when it comes to prejudice? For me, in terms of the elimination of it, I feel that this is almost like a remedy for it. Do not be content with just showing friendship in your words. Let your heart burn. I think that he's used the word very specifically, burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. And if we were to just keep that in the back of our mind as a remedy towards these innate little pieces of prejudice in our day-to-day interaction, and we were to objectively look at them and remove them and lean in and learn more about every individual, maybe, just maybe, we could be on our way to eliminating that across the world. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to each individual making their own change. But what do you think? How do you believe that we will eliminate prejudice? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know this can bring up a lot of different topics, and you can see in the length of this video, there's a lot to talk about. But being very specific, how can we literally make a step to be able to remove that out of our day-to-day lives and create a more united and peaceful world?